Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Thanks to everyone for dialing in to today's webinar. This is a Transcelerate webinar on the FDA PMSR Drug Device Combination Implementation Guide, a new solution that our Transcelerate team has developed. My name is Gloria McHugh. I'm a project manager for Transcelerate, and I'll be the host for today's webinar. Today's agenda we'll cover some logistics about the webinar operations. We'll do some presenter introductions. We'll provide a short Transcelerate overview, and then we'll get into the details of reviewing the implementation guide. And of course, we'll spend some time at the end doing Q&A. So the logistics for this webinar, all participants are muted for the call. You should be able to dial in using either your computer or your phone. You can reduce your control panel for a better view of the presentation by clicking on the orange and white arrow in the upper right corner next to your control panel. When you click on that, it will move the control panel to the right, and then you can move the control panel back to the left to open it again. Because all of the participants are muted, we will ask you to submit your questions that you have during the webinar to our presenters using the questions panel in that control panel. You can type your question in and then be sure to click send to send the question in. If you have any feedback or technical issues, please send an email to the events@transceleratebioPharmainc.com email box, and we'll try to get back to you as soon as possible. So we are going to be using some live polling during our webinar today to make it interactive. Just a reminder that all participation in the polling is voluntary and all responses will be anonymous. The answers will be shared only as a percentage of respondents. So in order to test out the functionality and also make sure that everyone can hear me okay, I would like to launch our first brief poll. If you can answer the question using the blue screen on your screen, we can test out the function, and it sounds like people can hear me. We've got some results coming in already, so thank you very much. We've got about 60% of the folks on the phone have voted already on their favorite color, and I'll just give it a few more seconds and then we'll close it. All right, I'll go ahead and close the poll and I'll share the results. So thanks for everyone for voting. It looks like 54% of the folks on the phone today have a favorite color of blue. So thank you. All right, so I do want to cover some ground rules today before we get started, just to make sure that everyone understands what we can share and what we can't share. First of all, participation is voluntary in this webinar, as is using any of the Transcelerate assets or tools. You do not have to identify what company you work for. Specific things that we would ask you not to discuss include what vendors, sites, or CROs you are using or not using, any issues that you may have with vendors, sites, or CROs. Please don't discuss any long-term development plans or anything related to costs, such as amounts paid to vendors or suppliers. Please also avoid discussing any efforts to avoid complying with applicable laws and regulations, or any information or data that's competitively sensitive or that your company would be reluctant to share externally. We also cannot answer any specific questions about vendors, costs of using or implementing Transcelerate assets or tools, or which member companies are using the assets or tools. And with that, I'll hand it over to Heike Schoper from EMD Serono, one of our member companies, to do the introductions. Heike?
Thank you, Gloria. And please move on to the next slide. My name is Heike Schoper, and I would like to introduce to you the team that has worked under the Transcelerate umbrella on the FDA Drug Device Combination Products Implementation Guide. I'm a PV Steering Committee member, and the Combos project runs under the interpretation of PV regulation. You will see this acronym more often as we go forward, IPVR. So next to myself, you see Jane Carroll. Jane Carroll is a senior leader in the pharmacovigilance department in charge for the region Americas, including USA, Canada, and Latin America. Jane is the lead of this project. Further, you see Rich Arriga. Rich is a Combos team member working at Pfizer as a senior director, head of case processing. Carol Ann Gerhardt is another presenter today. She's working at Merck as an associate director for pharmacovigilance and global standards. Keith Ammond is an executive medical director at Amgen working for global patient safety. And on the right side, you see team members that have contributed with their expertise in device. Ken Miklesh, who is working at Eli Lilly. He's a global patient safety device surveillance advisor. Miguel Hernandez, he is working at UCB as a medical device safety surveillance lead. Katba Duzi Ashur, she is working at Sanofi as a global senior director for pharmacovigilance. And last but not least, Leslie Ware, who is the project manager for the Combos team and has done an awesome job to support the team to produce the results, of which one is the webinar today. Next slide, please. A few words to Transcelerate. Transcelerate is a non-for-profit entity, and it was founded in 2012 with 10 member companies, starting initially with 5 initiatives to enhance development and research activities in the pharmaceutical industry. 2016, the Biocelerate focus on preclinical research was founded. Today, 19 member companies are part of Transcelerate, with over 1,000 people working in the different projects and initiatives. 25 plus initiatives are currently running, of which 4 are dedicated to pharmacovigilance. And one is the IPVR, of which the Combos team is a part of. Next slide, please. Our strong belief is that collaboration is key and is playing a critical role to further accelerate what we are doing to reach the future state. We are working in an R&D ecosystem that includes investigators, research, and also patient advocacy groups. Other associations are also key stakeholders, and in particular, health authorities. Next slide, please. The pharmacovigilance initiative in Transcelerate focused on, in one of their streams, on the interpretation of guidance and regulations. It was identified that there is an unmet need. We have regulations and guidance documents which are sometimes ambiguous, and that leads to misalignment across companies in the pharmaceutical industry, but also divergence in regulatory requirements across health authorities is a topic that is important. Therefore, the project aimed at sharing expertise to be more efficient, more effective, and to better meet the intent of regulation and guidances, ultimately leading to a facilitation to harmonize across regulators and to meet regulatory expectations. The value that is expected is improving patient safety, by sharing best practices and to have a better understanding where regulation might not be straightforward. Also, reduced risk for sponsors in inspections and compliance risks would result out of the better understanding of the regulation. And finally, harmonization will make it possible to be more proactive and to applying best practices with regulators. Next slide, please. So in very brief, this shows the methodology and approach that the Combos team applied. It is a 6-step approach from planning to delivery of the results. It is short from a project perspective, and you will see how this resulted in the materials that is shared with you today in the webinar. And with that, I would like to hand over to Jane Carroll, the project lead. Jane, over to you.
Thank you so much, Heike. So Gloria, if you could go on to the next slide and then just the next one after that. So thank you, Heike, and thank you for your wonderful support as our combo sponsor. I'm going to start with just an overview of our challenge with this guidance. So with the issuance of the final rule 21 CFR Part 4 in December 2016, followed by the draft guidance for post-marketing safety reporting for combination products in March, we are challenged to take a new approach for consistent and complete evaluation and reporting of combination products, as well as avoid any duplicate reporting. Many of us in industry have a quality system for MDR reporting and one for adverse event reporting for drugs and biologics. With the issuance of the draft guidance, we must take a different view, a holistic view of patient safety for combination products, and we have to integrate our quality systems for medical devices and adverse events more closely. This has been challenging for many of us. On to the next slide, please. So with the issuance of the draft guidance in March, the Transcelerate IPVR, the PV regulation initiative, identified a team of subject matter experts to interpret the new draft guidance. We met for the first time in June. There is the combos team. As we met for the first time, we actually had bags of combos to share among ourselves as we met many of us for the first time. We decided at that point that our goal was to bring together ambiguous areas and pain points from the draft guidance and create an implementation guide for use in industry to help each other and to help other companies implement this legislation within their companies. The implementation guide is a result of discussions to address these ambiguous areas. We made a very clear decision not to repeat things that were clear to us in the guidance or describe all sections of the guidance. It's important to note that we took the approach in the implementation guide to provide points to consider for combination products approved under an NDA, an ANDA, or a BLA that contain a device constituent part. So all of our perspective is from that point of view. Just a little bit about our timeline. So as I said, we met for the first time in June and shortly thereafter finalized collecting and categorizing pain points. In mid-July, we met again and spent almost a whole day dedicated to defining a combination product. It may seem like a lot of time, but it was critical for us to get on the same page. We finished drafting the implementation guide in August and completed member company and legal reviews through October, and here we are today making it available for you. We moved fast and worked from a draft guidance because we, us as industry, have to implement this legislation by July 2019, and we wanted to get practical help out to industry in a timely way and time enough to sort of digest it and think about how you want to implement it within your own companies. So on to the next slide, please. And then one more. Thank you. So just a little bit about the implementation guide. So this is really a little bit about how it's structured. So for each pain point, we identified the line in the draft guidance that was ambiguous. We then we presented a consideration, which is our best practice and our recommendation for successful implementation of this ambiguous area. Today, we're going to walk through the key points addressed in the implementation guide. Following the webinar, our implementation guide will be available on the Transcelerate website, and registered attendees will receive a link directly to the implementation guide. So give us a couple of days for this to all happen, and you'll receive the link at that time. We will address many of the questions you submitted when you registered. I would just note that we are also waiting for technical guidance from FDA about how to configure the E2B or electronic file for FAERS. As said, Rich Arriaga from Pfizer will be leading the first half of our conversation, and Carol Ann Gerhardt from Merck will be leading the second half of our conversation. Keith Sainamand from Amgen will be leading the question and answer session. Take it away, Rich.
Thank you, Jane. Next slide. Okay, so my section is divided into 7 steps of creation intended to give you lift. But I will start by asking, what's the first critical step that you should consider in order to make the implementation of 21 CFR Part 4 successful? So step number 1 is create the team. It's all about leadership. Everything rises and falls on leadership. If you're familiar with the book by Jim Collins, Good to Great, the first step is to get the right people on the bus. What if you have more than one alpha personality on your team? This should not be a problem if you have the right people on the bus, and that's because great leaders are also great followers. So that's one thing that our team was able to establish early on, is we had great communication skills, great leaders, and everyone took their role seriously. There are 4 critical C's that each person on the bus must possess if you want to win. Character, so you want people of high integrity. Chemistry, they work well with others. Competence, they're good at what they do, and consistent high performance. I would say that I would look for them in that order. Once you have the right people on the bus, you'll need to place them into the right seats. These are the functional representatives, such as safety, the formal complaint handling unit, representation, quality, risk management, and legal. Bear in mind that the device team and the drug biological team typically report through entirely different parts of the organization. So you will want to establish some functional harmonization between these groups. None of our member companies use a model where all these functional groups report up to a single channel. Then the team can write down the purpose, vision, and goals of the assignment to help you get to that finish line. This ensures you all understand what is your major why behind the assignment, and that you keep it top of mind as you make those critical decisions. Next slide, please. Creating lists. Inevitably, you will need to create multiple lists. But where do you begin? First, you will need to define the intended purpose of each list. So depending on the intended purpose, those lists should contain, in terms of columns, for example, the products that are in scope. The primary mode of action is imperative. The manufacturing site, whether the product is single entity, co-packaged, cross-label, constituent products that will be combined in the future. Consider adding a column for other identifiers such as the license number, NDA, PMA, PMN, or the UID or UDI for a device. If the intended purpose for a different list is to determine whether additional headcount will be necessary, then consider looking at historical data to establish a column for volume. You'll have to determine what's the appropriate time frame. Is 6 months adequate for you to make that call, or do you need 2 or 3 years? In that list, consider adding the hazards that are associated with that product and your reporting history to different health authorities as well. So this is all information that you want to gather, compile, and you're going to use that to help you make those other decisions. So there's not a single best way of doing this, so you'll have to figure out what is the best approach for your specific company, your specific needs. Next slide. Create a visual library. So I believe this is a critical step to building knowledge. It enhances learning and retention, so you do not have to rely on memory or recall. You might discover that you were including products that are commonly mistaken as combination products, but they're not. So for example, you might have situations where You think that any time or every time you use a medical product that's intended to be used together automatically makes it a combination product, and that's not the case. So I'll give you 4 examples. Example number 1, you physically or chemically combine 2 or more of the same type of medical products. These products are packaged or labeled to be used with one another. In that example, they're not, because they're the same type of medical products. A second example will be a drug and drug combination. So think of Tylenol and codeine. Those are not considered combination products. A device and a device combination. So think of a surgical stapler, obviously has to have a surgical staple. They're used, they're combined, but they don't fall under the combination rule. Or syringes that are marketed for general delivery and are to be used with unspecified drugs. And those are examples that are commonly mistakenly referred to as combination products, but they're not. Next slide. Create the QA material and include reasonable, foreseeable examples. So your company has a wealth of data already available to them, and this will help you build a strong foundation of knowledge. Use empirical data, discuss reasonable, foreseeable scenarios, review prior CAPAs, prior field actions, review reportable malfunctions, reportable deaths, or reportable serious injuries. This is all data that's going to be useful. And it's certainly useful in terms of developing the material that you're going to use to train your teams. There will be questions regarding information sharing and reporting of single entity products versus co-label products. So if you click on Advanced, please. So below, you see a single entity product. It's an inhaler with the drug, and the delivery mechanism is your device. The applicant of a single entity contacts the FDA when they have an event that meets the criteria for reporting. So that's example number 1. Click on Advance. Thanks. Example number 2, here we have a constituent product, we have a device, and we have the drug. So if the event meets the criteria for reporting of each constituent product, and your company is the first to be contacted, then you will be responsible for contacting the FDA and also the other applicant holder. And the other applicant holder contacts the FDA with their constituent product information in the appropriate time frame. So I say the appropriate time frame because if, for example, if they own the device, they might have 30 days. If they own the drug, they'll have less time frame. So you just have to figure that out based on the primary mode of action for that particular constituent component. Anticipate and address questions specific to the systems that you'll be using for complaint processing or case processing. So what are the design changes of your system that will be necessary so that you can submit reports to the FDA electronically? Consider including screenshots of how to select boxes. What are the different lists of values in your system that will be used for processing records? So questions are going to come up. What if I have a malfunction and it's not reportable of the device? Which boxes should I select? What if it's an AE, but it's not a serious AE? So those are all things that you need to consider, and you want to have the appropriate materials developed and created so you can answer those questions so everyone is on the same page. So these are some of the many questions that you will need to answer accurately and confidently if you plan on leading your way to success. Next slide. Create the 3 R's. So you have the right training for the right functions and the right people. So we have the right people on the bus. We have them seated in the right seats. And now you will need to create the right training. This is specific and targeted training for the teams that the right people are leading. So I'm not referring to general purpose material intended for a general audience. My recommendation is that you train the people responsible for making reporting decisions on doing just that. So in general, there's no need for that group who makes reporting decisions to understand the nuances of how to conduct an investigation. The same thinking applies to the team responsible for investigations, CAPA, and field actions. They should focus on developing the skills that are necessary for them to perform their actual function. Once you have correctly established the accountability swim lanes, separate the groups so that you can spend the necessary amount of time studying and developing their expertise in those areas. So an example of a training pitfall is spending valuable time and energy teaching people who do not need to understand the regulatory terms such as likely, reasonably known, and what is not a malfunction. So train the people who must know ththese terms and execute at the operational level and spend enough time, whatever time is necessary, so they understand that. But there are different groups, different functional areas who don't need to know these terms, and so it would not be a wise investment of your time to try to get them to understand these terms. So you need to be specific and targeted. Next slide. Create your hazard and reportable malfunction files. So do the folks that are involved with or newly becoming involved with devices, for example, do they know what a hazard is, what a hazard situation is, what severity levels or seriousness are? So in the PV world, we tend to use the term seriousness, but the device world uses severity. Are these terms interchangeable? So you want to make sure that when you're using terms that you have an operational definition and that you're using them in the correct context. Have you considered the sequence of events necessary to create a specific hazard situation? ISO 14971 is a risk management standard for devices. It's where you can go in order to understand what is meant by risk and the risk parameters. Understand how risk or hazard files may be used, and the key word is may, not an absolute requirement. They may be used to help making reporting decisions under CFR 803 or CFR 806, which is your corrections and removals. I personally am a proponent of creating a reportable malfunction list to facilitate consistency of MDR reporting. This list should be clear. You should eliminate ambiguous words or conditions or situations and address decision point roadblocks. So for example, when you have an incident and a reporting decision can't be made within the allotted time frame, what am I expected to do in that situation? Am I expected to be conservative in report? Or am I be expected to not report because I, as a representative of the company, feel that I don't have enough information? So those are questions that you want to address in your training so that they really don't come up during execution of actual cases, because everybody understands what it is, what is the part that the role that they're playing and what they're expected to do. Next slide. So create different workflows and process diagrams and or decision trees. I'm also a proponent of decision trees and procedures, and they should be used during training. You need to study them over and over again and discuss the reasonable foreseeable scenarios. There needs to be some room for judgment, but try to reduce the available options at the execution level. So yes, we do allow for judgment, but try to make it so that the judgment can be rationalized and justified, and that in most cases, most people come up with the same answer all the time. This is an example of a medical device decision tree. So the FDA doesn't actually provide a decision trees, but this is taking those requirements and putting them into a decision tree format. So you might find value in combining the drug or biologics decision points as well. But in our case, we kept it just for devices. And the reason we kept it for devices is because our perspective was that we are primarily pharma companies. Devices is a new area for us. So what are the things that we really should learn, should know, should study? And so that's why we kept it this way. So again, it's optional if a different company wants to use or combine biologics and drugs to a decision tree. My only recommendation would be to keep it as simple as possible. So my section is complete now. I hope you found the material both helpful and thought-provoking, and that it challenges you to think of some of the avoidable obstacles that may lie ahead of you. So we have one polling question that's coming up. If you could just click to the next slide so we can have that. And the question is, would having access to the editable file of this decision tree to implement something similar in your organization be helpful? So if you want us to make this decision tree available for you so you can edit, let us know if this will be helpful to you. Thank you, and we'll pass on, after you answer your question, we'll pass the microphone on to Carol Ann.
Thanks, Rich. This is Gloria McHugh, so please go ahead and use the polling function to answer the poll question. It looks like we've got about half of the folks on the phone who have answered the question, so we'll leave it open for just a few more minutes or a few more seconds. If you can use that polling function to answer the poll, would be appreciated. All right. Looks like we've got about 60% of the folks on the phone voted, so thank you very much, and I'll share the results. So it looks like 94% said yes, they would find an editable version of the decision tree helpful. All right. And moving on to Carol Ann.
Thanks, Gloria. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. So we'll move on now to receipt of serious and unexpected events. So for combination products marketed under an NDA, ANDA, or BLA, you'll need to continue to submit your 15-day reports for AEs that are both serious and unexpected, as defined in the 31480 and 680 sections of this CFR. Serious being defined as an adverse experience that results in death, life-threatening AE, inpatient hospitalization or prolongation of hospitalization, persistent or significant disability, congenital anomaly, etc. Unexpected are adverse experiences that are not listed in the current labeling for the product as a whole. So, for example, if you've got a single entity combination product, we would be, our expectedness would be determined via the prescribing information for the product. Whereas if you've got a cross-labeled or co-packaged combination product, your expectedness would need to consider the labeling that accompanies each of the constituent parts of that combination product. Next slide. So for combination products that contain a device constituent part, malfunction reports are required when you become aware of information that reasonably suggests that your product malfunctioned and it would be likely to cause death or serious injury if the malfunction were to recur. One thing of note in this section is information including professional, scientific, medical facts, observations, opinions may be enough to reasonably suggest that your device may have caused or contributed to a reportable event. So as such, a return complaint sample is really not needed always to determine that the event is reportable. And in those cases, awareness of the complaint may represent your day zero of the reporting timeline. Next slide. Now we'll talk a little bit about case processing. So FDA has provided us a table in Appendix 4 of the draft guidance to assist us with mapping combination product individual case safety report elements to the data elements within the current Form 3500A, FAERS, and EMDR systems. They have also provided guidance on what information should be included when you're submitting a combination product ICSR. So for example, if you've got a malfunction-only reportable event, your patient identifier obviously would be none. Your adverse event coding could be no adverse event. Some considerations that were identified by our member companies for device data capture. Some of the companies are utilizing MEDRA event coding for malfunctions, using the higher level group terms of either device issues or product issues. This will also be helpful for companies to isolate these malfunction reports for inclusion in the aggregate report in the summary and analysis section of your aggregate report, which we will discuss on a later slide. Other companies are adding device constituents to the company drug dictionary. This will allow all device fields to be present within your case and available for completion. That will then in turn allow the device fields to be pulled into a narrative via an auto narrative functionality if the fields are not available for E2B transmission to FDA. Next slide. So reporting foreign AEs to FDA. So 15-day reports for combination products apply to foreign experiences. So foreign, basically the intent here is foreign adverse experiences need to be treated the same as U.S. adverse experiences. So if they meet criteria for reporting under your 21 CFR 314 or 680, then they must be reported. Next slide. So reporting follow-up to FDA. So our follow-up reports are required when the individual case safety report submitter becomes aware of reportable new information that wasn't available at the time of the initial report. So one of the things you want to consider doing is predetermining what your company considers to be reportable new information. So for example, I may say anything, any sort of investigation results, or any sort of return complaint sample evaluation, new or updated lot information would be considered by my company to be reportable new information. And then, so once you've predetermined that, then that information can be entered into your case as significant follow-up and therefore be set to auto-report to FDA whenever you receive that type of information. Next slide. So periodic safety reporting and the summary and analysis. So periodic reporting is required for combination products marketed under the an NDA, ANDA, or BLA. If your combination product contains a device constituent part, then your periodic report will now need to include a summary and analysis of both 5-day reports and malfunction reports that were submitted by your company during the reporting period. So this is why when we went back to, talk back to the case processing section, it's important for you to be able to identify your malfunction and 5-day reports within your system so that those reports can then be isolated and extracted to be included into the summary and analysis section of your aggregate report. Some of the considerations for the summary and analysis: some of our companies are creating a template for the format and the information that we'll be including within our summary and analysis. The template does include both a listing as well as an analysis of the reported events. Some of our companies are creating processes to obtain the analysis portion from our manufacturing areas who've actually performed the investigation into those events. Companies are also highlighting if there were updates made to labeling or any sort of actions, corrective actions taken as a result of the events in order to minimize risk or improve patient safety. The summary and analysis should include both initial and follow-up reports submitted during the interval. If there happen to be no malfunctions or 5-day reports during the reporting period, we will be noting that within our report. Next slide. So business and supplier agreements. So constituent part applicants are required then to share information with other constituent part applicants for the same combination product. So you want to make sure that you're sharing events involving death, serious injuries, and any adverse experiences described in the 21 CFR 314 or 600. The requirement also applies whether the event is expected or unexpected per the product labeling. And really, you need only share the initial information that's received by your company. Some of the best practices that we considered were some of our companies are starting by creating a comprehensive list of all of our suppliers and what constituent parts they supply. So kind of going back to that list that Rich was talking about, these are some of the things you may want to consider including in that list or creating a separate list with this sort of information. You'll also want to ensure that any of your agreements contain clear definitions of terms so that you avoid any confusion on what type of event to be exchanged. So for example, you want to make sure that both companies and your agreement clearly define and understand what a serious injury is considered. And you want to do this so that you ensure that you're exchanging any sort of event that falls within that serious injury definition. You also want to ensure your agreements include a clear delineation of who's responsible for what. So is my company responsible for collection of the events, assessment for reporting, or actually reporting of the events? And then you also want to ensure that you've clearly defined the timing for exchange of the information. And this is basically to ensure that the company that is responsible for assessment, for reportability, as well as reporting, have enough time to do that to meet FDA required timelines. So that's the end of my section. I'll turn it over to Keith then to go over some of our polling and question and answers.
Okay, so thank you, Carolyn, and thanks to all the presenters so far for this information. We would, before we go to specific questions from the attendees, we would like to ask 2 general polling questions. So if you could use the polling function to answer first, how likely are you to use the material presented today? And you have 5 options to choose from there on your screen. So we'll give you some time to enter that.
Thanks, Rich. It's Gloria. It looks like about almost 60% of the folks on the phone have voted, so we'll leave the poll open for a few more seconds to give everyone a chance to vote. And also just a reminder that the questions panel can be used to submit questions to our presenters. After we finish these 2 short polls, we will move to the Q&A session. And it looks like we're up to about 68% of the folks on the phone have voted. So I'll go ahead and close the poll and I'll share the results. So it looks like 60% of the folks on the phone who voted are very likely to use this material, 31% somewhat likely, and 10% neutral.
Okay. That's great. Thank you for that feedback. And we have one additional question. How likely are you to refer this material to a friend or colleague? And the response options are the same there.
All right. All right, thank you, everyone. It looks like we've got just about 70% of the folks on the phone have voted. So I'll go ahead and close the poll and share the results. So again, similar results. We've got 65% said they're very likely to refer the material and 33% somewhat likely. So thank you very much to everyone for participating in our poll.
Yes, thank you for the feedback. It's very helpful. So we can move now to some of the specific questions that have come in. So the first question we have is regarding if you have a waiver to submit the PBR, periodic report, rather than the PADR, should you include the summary and analysis of 5-day and malfunction reports within the PBR? So I think I can address that, and anyone else can certainly chime in. But if you have a waiver and that has been approved by the agency, there is guidance, there is information, the guidance that you can submit these, you should submit these reports in that report in the PBR. So again, of course, confirm with the agency that the waiver is in place before including information in a PBR over the PADR. I don't know if anyone else has any other input on that. Or
Hi, Keith. Yeah, that's definitely, I think, the best practice that we've been considering. I think that really adding a specific appendix is sort of the approach that we're looking at, whether it be to the PBRA or the PSUR or the PADER, sort of whatever is being submitted for that particular product.
Yeah, thanks, Jane. A good point. Since the PBRA is a global document, it's, I think, a great best practice. Use the appendix where the FDA has specific appendix. Okay, so we'll move on to another question. This question is asking, how do you intend to submit reports under the rule to the FDA? So if I could ask one of our presenters maybe to speak to that.
Yeah, so our plan is to submit electronically via the drug or device house, or I'm sorry, drug or biologics house, depending on whether it's NDA or BLA marketed, and we'll be doing that electronically via the individual case safety report out of the safety system.
Okay, thanks, Carol Ann. There's a question regarding a section of Rich's presentation. If a syringe that is available for general use is co-packaged with a drug product in a vial, does this classify as a combination product?
Yeah, so it really would not be considered a general syringe use. If it's you have the syringe as your device, it's your delivery mechanism, and it's co-packaged with a drug, then that's a combination device there. So yes.
Okay, thanks, Rich. So I have another question. Is there any difference in applicable reporting requirements under the rule for single entity versus co-packaged or cross-labeled combination products?
Keith, can you read that question again?
Sure. So I think is there any difference in reporting requirements if the combination product is single entity or co-packaged or cross-labeled? I think the answer to that is no. It's as long as you have a combination product, right, that meets the definitions, those different types.
Yeah, so correct. So there's always more information that could be added there to provide clarity, but in general, the rules apply, whether it's single entity or co-package or cross-labeled. The only thing they can consider in that situation is what is the actual event. So let's say, for example, I have a constituent product, I manufacture A, and you have the drug and you're manufacturer B. I can still have an event with the device before I combine the two down the road. And so if I have a device incident that meets the criteria for reporting, I would end up reporting that separately if I haven't combined the two devices yet, the two products yet.
Okay. And we have a general question. I'm not sure if that's been responded to. Will you please provide us with a recording of this presentation? So maybe Gloria, you could just briefly address that.
Yes, we will send out a recording to a link to the recording within 1 to 2 days, and we also plan to provide a link to the actual implementation guide that's been developed by Transcelerate. So we'll send that out within the next couple of days.
Okay, thank you. So I'm just going to take a second here to look at this question. So we have a question on combination products when used in an investigational setting. Just if we can just comment on that. So I think, I can speak to part of that. I think if you have a commercially approved combination product and you're using that in a post-marketing setting, in a study that you're conducting after approval, our best practice understanding is that the requirements of the rule would apply in that case because you still have a commercially approved combination product, so the reporting obligations are still there. So I don't know if that is addressing that question, but I think that's.
So yeah, so Keith, I'll just add a little more detail to that. So yeah, at a high level, that's correct. So when you look at the guidance, it says that this is meant for marketed devices. Investigational combination products are not in scope. So let's say an example where I have a medical device that is marketed, and I'm going to use it, combine it with a new drug. If I have that combination, makes it investigational, so to speak, and so the requirements for new drugs, so 31232, and the requirements for devices and investigational devices, which is 812-150, that applies. So we just have to be sure that if I have a device that's already marketed and I'm doing a clinical trial and combining it with a new drug, a new biologic, at that point, as I understand it, looking at the guidance, at that point, any event that meets the criteria reporting will be under the investigational requirements, not under this part of the combination rule.
Okay, thanks, Rich. Yeah, thank you for clarifying on that. So we have a pre-submitted question that may be able to. Is there information on definition for same similar with regard to device parts of combination products? I don't know if.
Yeah, just read that one more time. I'm sorry, I just have a little hard time hearing, but read it one more time.
Sure. Is there information available on the definition of same or similar when applied to combination products? I think this is coming from 803 for medical device.
Yeah, so that's a good question. It's not easy to understand or easy to answer, I should say. So when you look at the regulations, when you're talking about devices, they refer to same or similar, and it's usually with respect to how the intended use of the product, the safety profile of the product, the way it's marketed. So if you look at, my recommendation is if you look up under device family, you'll see a pretty good, the FDA website, look up under device family, you'll see a very good description of what same or similar comprise of. One thing to be cognizant of is most of us are selling products all around the world. So sometimes in the case of the EU, they'll use a similar incident. In the case of Australia and New Zealand, they use a similar event. And in the FDA, we use similar devices. They have completely different definitions. So just be careful when we're using similar, try to give it context and be specific, as specific as possible.
Okay, great. Thank you, Rich. So we have another question here on whether the team considered requirements from other regions, such as the EU or Japan. So maybe, Jane, I don't know if you would.
Yeah, I'd be happy to take that. So, I mean, really, the EU has nothing published about combination products. Although we're lucky enough to have Miguel Hernandez and Katva as well, who are really, EU specialists on our combos team. In terms of Japan, we actually requested as part of our project an expert from one of the member companies on the Japanese legislation on combination products. And so we asked them to review our implementation guide against the PMDA regulations. And what we saw is I think there was one small point that they made that we changed a couple of words, but that our implementation guide doesn't conflict with anything in the PMDA regulations. And to date, only the Japan and the US have combination product regulations. So those were, the ones that we really took a look at as part of our project.
Okay, thanks, Jane. Another important question, what is the implementation date of the final rule?
Yeah, so July 31st. I think during the presentation I said July, but it's July 31st.
you. Okay, so I'll, I guess, make one last call for questions. So I think we're coming up on the end of the presentation, but so Gloria, I guess I can turn it back over to you for closing.
Okay. Well, thank you everyone for your attention today. Thank you for participating in our webinar. And again, we will be sending the link to the recording out, as well as a link to where the implementation guide is available on the Transcelerate website. So thank you and have a great rest of your day.